Welcome to the Knowledgebase Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Sreya Dutta, technical writer at Clover Network. Welcome to the Knowledgebase Ninjas podcast. Shreya, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Fantastic.
It's a nice day in California.
Yes, same here as well. Nice sunny day. So I'm really looking forward to chat with you in the next 20-25 minutes to learn more about you and what are you doing and how are you related to documentation. Just to get everything into context, please introduce a little bit more about yourself, Shreya, and also let me know how did you initially got into documentation, please?
Sure. So I grew up in India and I was in Hyderabad for most of my life. And I studied science and most of my schooling was in Hyderabad. And I later started working in Hyderabad itself. So interestingly, my first early job was because I had interest in multimedia. I loved graphics and animations, and I just took a course on that during my graduate days, and I enjoyed it a lot. And my first job kind of was led through that, where I ended up as an e-learning instructional designer. I initially worked for an aviation services company, which was we were building e-learning courses for the aviation industry. We had customers like Airbus and Snecma Motors. So that was my first 4.5 years of learning to be an instructional designer, working with group captains, subject matter experts, and learning. This was fun, interesting, a lot of computer graphics. And I learned a lot at that time. And then I moved to Progress Software. So that was my first time actually working on software product e-learning courses. And I was an instructional designer as well. So that was around the first 8 years. And then I finally joined Oracle as a curriculum developer. And I was part of the communications global business unit. And I moved internally after that for a information developer role within Oracle's Fusion Cloud application product, where I learned that, and that's where I really learned technical writing. So this team was focused on the project portfolio management product, which is currently part of the top ERP cloud offering in the industry for ERP cloud, and especially because it was SaaS and it was the new thing. I learned a lot about technical writing there. Then in 2018, I quit after 10.5 years and I moved to California. And after an initial break, I joined Clover Network as a technical writer last year for their developer relations team.
That's a great journey. So how long have you been with the documentation or in this profile, Shreya?
So documentation, including my Oracle experience, would be around 10 years, and the other half was instructional design. My point of view has been pretty broad because of having exposure to both. So my view is that the beginning and the end goals of both are kind of same. They are different deliverables, and I kind of see the whole documentation training as part of the same spectrum, just focused at different objectives in helping people being educated about your product and how to use it. So I believe that my experience as an instructional designer has added to when I became a technical writer. So
okay, great. So what's your documentation process at Clover Network and who normally gets involved in defining this process?
So at Clover, and it was similar in my team, my product team at Oracle, it was driven by the Scrum teams. And so it's similar at Clover as well. There are product owners, engineers, QA, and technical writers part of the Scrum team. Technical writers review the user stories, plan the updates to the help documents. And when technical writers are involved at an early stage of design documents, there is a greater chance for you to influence whether it's product UI language, messaging, and kind of be user advocates and playing that role of having your Scrum team who's deep into the nitty-gritty of stuff, see the bigger picture and kind of interconnect um, the correlation of product and feature dependencies between different Scrum teams. So that's the value technical writers can bring in the setup. And the process at Clover is, it is agile Scrum based. It was similar at Oracle, but I can't say that for all teams because what happens is every company and team has their own needs, and sometimes technical writers are not as many in numbers, and there are many Scrum teams. So, so there are also situations where you might not be part of a Scrum team is because it's just not feasible, and you have to find other ways to circumvent these situations and interact with the stakeholders offline, get the same information by reviewing design documents, and just being proactive and building that relationship with the team is an important part of the process. So it's not a one size fits all simply because in ratios, technical writers are much less. Like my current team at Clover, we are 4 people working on the technical developer documentation. And there are about 10 people in the merchant facing documentation, which is more end user for the Clover hardware point of sale devices. So they are 2 separate teams, and the merchant-facing team is focused on UX writing. We are focused on the writing in the API reference for the third-party developers that build apps and explaining the platform, providing them the basic concepts to understand what we offer, and really learning how to use it. So in that proportion, some teams we are part of the scrums and some teams we are not, and you just adapt, and that's the challenge as a technical writer.
Nice. So as important factors, what would you consider when creating any documentation for your applications?
So, especially because now I have more recently in the last 10 plus years focused on SaaS and cloud-based applications. I see that in such scenarios, it's the Scrum-based methodology, which is more common. And that has definitely changed and changed the process and the initial the way in which people were working, and there were assumptions, with the waterfall method. And when we transitioned to agile, technical writers and the teams were required to push the envelope, right? And they were we tried to build new processes and make it simpler and make it more nimble and lean to move ahead and keep up with the Scrum, the pace of the Scrum teams. It was not just a challenge for technical writers, but it was a challenge for everyone. And I've seen the transition to Agile even within Oracle, which was a very large organization with people who were used to doing things in a certain way, and then everything changed, and it took many years to kind of smoothen out and get things working. To have the technical writer represented in the Scrum itself in the beginning was a challenge, right? Because people did not understand why the technical writer had to be part of the team. And over time, it started bringing out the value as to why this was actually a benefit, because if they had to be nimble and agile, and if a technical writer was actually responsible to review the UI language, then influencing that language early before the coding is done was a strategic role to get things done quickly. And over time, we evolved, and we tried to come up with tips and tricks, and how do you best practices of working with Scrum teams, and really figuring out how do you manage this. It is always going to be one technical writer to 3 or 4 or more Scrum teams. So how do you do this, right? So the big advantage of the Scrum methodology turned out to be that technical writers, one, were in the center of the action, and they were able to have access to user stories, designs, discussions very early up in the cycle. And that was always a problem in in the waterfall days, because you're looking at a design 2 years after it was done and coded, right? So that changed a lot. And then technical writers became a valuable and a strategic part of this whole thing. And over time became important to even work on release readiness materials, like, documenting the new features, getting them out to the people on the field, documenting bug fixes, because the environment would be patched, unlike in the on-premise days, right, where people may or may not take an update. It was their choice. But in the cloud world, the patches would happen and people would have to know what the impact would be, what are the bugs that were fixed, what were the new features that were going to show up, would those features impact their current user flows. So that's where I think the technical writer suddenly became very much more visible and a very key part of this whole process.
Fantastic. So let's talk about your user-driven documentation. Yeah, just what is this user-driven documentation, Shreya, and what are the benefits?
User-driven documentation is being talked a lot, but I like to go back to the basics, because even as an instructional designer, that was something that was key. Understanding your user's persona, understanding what is your user doing, what is the task they're trying to accomplish, putting yourself in their shoes and trying to play that role, while trying to understand what it is that they need versus what we used to think in the early days, that you just have to meticulously cover every single thing that the product does, right? Which is still true. It's not that you don't have to, but the focus and the driving force is now clearly that because you can no longer write a whole guide in one sprint, right? So you have to kind of prioritize, and that's how working with stakeholders has changed. And so user-driven documentation, I think, is, focus on the user stories, focusing on the task that is being accomplished, looking at the acceptance criteria, looking at, what are the top 5 things the user should be able to do by reading this documentation, prioritizing what is more important with your stakeholders, saying, hey, I am on multiple Scrum teams. Please tell me what are the top things that that must go at the end of the sprint, and kind of being able to set priorities and then focus on what's most important to the user, and iteratively building over time is the strategy right now. But at the same time, the focus on the user has become even more so, because in SaaS, you do start with a user story, right? You're focused on what is the user doing, what is the story, and really understanding what users who are trying to accomplish a task to achieve their business goals, what is it that they need to know, and bringing that focus and really doing 100% as much as close as possible in a sprint, and over time improving that is very important. And being mindful, now that I'm in the developer relations team, I have more access to information, questions coming from customers, and that also helps, right? Like over time, you start to see what are the top problems that customers are facing, and if those problems are in my areas, I'm like, oh, that's cool. I didn't think about that, and focusing on answering the questions, focusing on problem solving, right? I think that has become extremely important now, and having this exposure to support teams, having exposure to the questions users are sending, where are they getting stuck, really getting into their mind, getting into their day-to-day jobs, has become a key factor in building good, high-quality documentation.
User-driven documentation, fantastic. That's nice to know. So, are Clover Network currently generating any organic search traffic from your knowledge base?
So we have recently started using Google Analytics. So we do have search data, but coming to metrics is a different discussion. I've been listening to lots of podcasts and webinars about it, and it's one thing to really. It's very important to have visibility into how much traffic is coming into your site, what are the keywords with which people are searching for your help, to make sure that those keywords are there in your help and used. So we are definitely doing that. What would add value, though, is to really understand when somebody actually used your documentation and succeeded in completing the task. And from a public site, that's much harder to figure out. So, but then, yeah, we are actually tracking. In the last 6 months, we've started using Google Analytics, and we were using a different tool before that, but that was not as elaborate and detailed as Google Analytics is.
Fine. So in terms of networks, developer support strategy, what role does documentation have in Clover Networks?
In Clover Network, the developer relations team supports third-party developers who build apps for Clover. Clover has an app market where merchants who buy devices, so merchant of who own restaurants, they bill customers, and these developers can build apps that support various ordering use cases, right? And we give some apps out of the box, and the developer community builds other apps, and they anticipate other sorts of needs. So providing information to two types of users. One is the business users who are people looking for, hey, how can I make, how can I collaborate with Clover and use their platform and build something that will generate revenue for me. And then these business users might recruit developers, or there could be individual developers who decide that they want to use Clover's platform to build an app. So walking a developer through, maybe tutorials, giving them a quick, here's all the things we offer, and then giving them the various options with which they can build apps. So Clover's platform is an Android-based platform, but we also provide other options. We have an e-commerce API. We have, REST API-based apps. There are semi-integrations. There are many options that developers have, and that's the cool thing that the community, that they can choose from what they want, and they can build apps how they want. And our job for documentation is to ensure that they have the resources and the examples and the content and the conceptual information needed to understand what is available. They need access to the API reference. The API reference has to be clearly documented to help them understand how to use the attributes. So that is the primary role of documentation.
Great. So we are about to go to our rapid fire round. Would you like to add anything more, Shreya, before I jump on to the rapid fire round?
Yeah, so I just wanted to call out one accomplishment, which is something that happened yesterday, and that is satisfying from the user-centric documentation that you talked about, was that one of our engineers who supports developers, there was a new integrator who started working on Clover's platform, and they sent them the documentation, and these guys seem to have been able to go live without any glitches, and that was called out, and that was very satisfying. I think that's a good example of success and having generated quality documentation. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well done on that. So nice. It's a good news to share with everyone, of course.
Yes.
Super. So rapid fire round. Who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
So it's not one individual, but I would say it's my team in Oracle, because when I moved from instructional design, curriculum development, it was the whole team. Everyone. So the peer reviewers was you would create your document and you would share it with the team, and I have not seen such wonderful, robust reviews, and they ensured the managers, the product managers, the strategy team, everybody was very passionate about very high quality, well-written documentation, and they always wanted the best for the customer. So that always helped me push my limits and really learn how to make great documentation. And I had lots of examples and materials that they had created to refer to and learn from. So I think I would give a lot of credit to the team, not just my direct tech writing team, but the larger team, the stakeholders who were so passionate about it.
Thank you. So can you share a documentation-related resource you have consumed recently?
So I have of course, like going to our own doc site. But besides that, of course, I have been using, looking at a lot of visuals. I like visuals, and I've been listening to podcasts. I would treat them as resources because I'm learning from them. I've been reading a lot of articles on how the whole challenge of work from home is affecting different companies and how they're dealing with it. So I just, I haven't exactly like looked at traditional documentation, but I see all of these as knowledge resources out there that people are sharing. And then I appreciate how people write them and how they think through them. And I look at those as examples for me to improve my own documentation. So
fantastic. Nice. So what is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
Definitely, focus on the user and try to put yourself in their shoes, play that role, understand what does their day-to-day life look like, understanding that persona, what is their routine. That really gives you perspective on what they need and what kind of information and what kind of detail they require in documentation. And really understanding what you're dealing with, a very basic user or a advanced user or different kinds of users, business users who already, let's say, have prerequisite knowledge versus users who are technical. They kind of know how to use stuff, but they still need to know very basic information. Really understanding that clearly is something that I wish I had known in that time, but now, over time, this has been my learning. So I really appreciate everything through my experience at Oracle and various companies in the past.
Fantastic. And podcast like this exactly does that good thing with guests like yourself, Shreya. So thank you for sharing that piece of advice.
Sure. Thank you for this. Yeah.
So thank you, Shreya, for your time with us today. And is there anything else you would like to quickly summarize or add to this to our audience?
Definitely. I've been reading lots of blogs as well. Like I've been reading Tom Johnson's blog. I heard his podcast recently. So I've been thinking about the metrics question and, the analytics. Of course, I have a lot of ideas on how things can be. The good thing is that the role of the technical writer is evolving to something much, much broader than people think. So that's something that I have been consciously kind of observing over time, which is like, it's not just, you don't just write. A technical writer has a very broad role. They can be their user advocates, they're out there always kind of championing the user. At Clover, that is even more so because I'm directly in the Clover developer relations team. And that is, I think, a very key role that technical writers can play because they are separated from the complexity and the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day product details, and they can provide that value when they are part of the teams and they're part of the design or they're part of those discussions. And that is something that I think a technical writer has a much bigger picture and a broader point of view from the user side. And that is something we need to leverage and help evolve. So it has gone from being someone, even though the word writer, I don't think we have the correct role name for technical writer yet, because you play many roles. And I think that's the cool thing. And it's a challenge, and, it brings out a lot of people with different kinds of skills. And I think it's nice to see this evolution, and I'm looking forward to what's the next thing.
Super. So I wish you all the best of luck for all the upcoming projects and brilliant documentation that you're going to produce in the upcoming path. So thank you again and have a good day, Shreya.
Thank you, Gauri. Thanks a lot. You have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledgebase Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.